Do you guys feel like you're leaving money on the table, playing your hand and not the actual player? Are you tired of losing huge pots you could have won if you had just emptied that one final clip on the river?
Still has that 7 of clubs.
10 seconds.
Very interesting hand. He might show it down. And look at this. Tolerine moves all in, putting Cipolla at risk. And what a decision it is. He has Queen 6, an absolute bluff catcher. Wow, and a snap fold as well from Cipolla. Ben Tolerine up to 11 million. Do you like this bluff? I mean, it worked.
Well, today we're tackling one of the best ways to print money in PLO without even having to show your hand. And it is the 3-barrel bluff. Guys, you don't get many opportunities to 3-barrel bluff in crazy action PLO games because people are going to be all in before the river quite often. So when you get to the river and you don't have anything at all, then you better make it count, which is exactly what I'm going to be teaching you guys here today. So when is the best time to 3-barrel bluff? Well, the best times to 3-barrel bluff is when you originally intended to represent a hand on the flop that either came on the turn where nothing changed on the river. When your villain usually gets to the rivers in these spots, it means they're most likely calling down with everything but the nuts and is either hoping you either slow down or the board changes in their favor. So, for example, let's say we open from the button with Jack, Jack 7, 2 diamonds, 1 club, 1 spade. A passive big blind player calls. The flop comes 7-8-2 rainbow with 1 club. Our opponent checks, and I personally love c-betting this board with our hand because we have a lot of good blockers to represent multiple straights. If a 5 or a 9 or a 10 comes, and we can possibly put pressure on random hands like King King 9-2, Queen Queen 3-4, or random overs like King Queen 10-3, Ace King Queen 5 to fold right away on the flop and we deny their equity. If our villain is lag, then I prefer to check this back because we don't want to get check raised off our hand. So let's say we bet, villain calls, turn comes a 9 of clubs. That is a bingo card for us. Opponent checks, and now it's time to represent, of course, Jack 10. We have 2 jacks in our hand. So we bet full pot in order to put pressure on worse straights, 2 pairs, or even sets, as it puts them in a very difficult spot. Because if they have a straight, a low straight, they're either going to be dead, or we're going to have a lot of outs if we have, say, a set plus a flush draw, or 2 pair plus a flush draw ourselves. So villain thinks for a while and eventually makes the call. At this point, it's safe to say most of the time, unless we're very deep, he's almost never going to have Jack 10 here, or else he would have most likely just repot to go all in, as there's a tons of bad rivers. So let's say the river comes a king, a random card that does not change the board. He's staring at the board, thinks for a little while, and checks again. And again, now it's time to put max pressure on our opponents, as we would also be doing this with the nut straight. So we pot again, and the majority of time, in my experience, people fold here pretty quickly. You can also do this with hands like Queen Queen 8-9 on King Jack 5-9, representing Queen 10, or King King 7-8 on Jack Queen 7 Ace 4 to represent King 10. Now, if you guys are serious about taking your PLO game to the next level, then hit that like and subscribe button as I come out with lessons every 3 days. And if you want to enroll into the best PLO training site in the world, then hit that link in my description for PLO Mastermind, as it gives you lessons that goes over every single scenario you can possibly imagine, as well as a PLO trainer that tells you exactly what ranges to play in every single spot. So the second best spot to 3-barrel bluff is when you've repped a strong hand on the flop and all the draws missed. Many times we're going to be c-bet bluffing the flop with multiple draws, blockers to nut draws, random air with backdoor flush draws, pairs with straight blockers, and many, many more, depending on our opponents. These can be amazing opportunities to steal massive pots from all types of players and gain a lot of momentum in our favor, as well as possibly tilt our opponents to make them frustrated that they're not winning any pots versus us. Whether they're passive or aggressive, because the majority of the time, all types of players are going to have tons of draws in these spots. For example, let's say we open the button with ace 5, 6, 7 with 2 clubs. The big blind calls. He's kind of a taggish player, nothing out of the ordinary. The flop comes deuce 3, 9 with 2 spades, and we have the ace of spades in our hand with a gut shot. Villain checks, and this is another great hand to c-bet, you guys, again, because we have blockers to possible straights that may come on the turn, a nut flush blocker where if a spade comes, we can represent the nut flush. So we c-bet half pot, a villain calls, and the turn comes a offsuit 8. So now we have a backdoor wrap. Villain doesn't look very confident and checks, and this is another great spot to bet big again, as villain can have a bunch of random hands that call the flop that will now have to fold a turn. Hands like straight draws himself, like king, queen, 4, 5. Random one pair hands like 9, 10, king, 5. 5, 5, 6, 8 for a gut shot himself. Random flush draws that he just can't call with. So we pot, and the villain thinks for a while. And real quick, the reason why it's hard for him to call without the nut flush here is because we can have the nut flush draw ourselves with backup. So a lot of type players are going to fold weak flush draws here, just understanding that. Even if they hit the flush, they're going to lose a ton of money. So we pot, and the villain thinks for a while and eventually makes the call. So at this point, we're putting him in all sorts of hands, possible flush draws, pairs with straight draws, or even a flush draw straight draw combination, maybe even a 2 pair that's slow playing his hand, like 9-2, 9-3, random hands like that. But if he had a hand like 8-9, he would most likely pot, go all in, or if he had a set, he would most likely check jam the turn. The river comes a offsuit 2. Nothing changes. Villain checks, and this is the perfect time to move all in to try and get all of his hands that aren't full houses or trips to fold, right? So only rarely will he ever have a 2 or a full house here. The majority of time, players will not play, the majority of times players here will fold based solely on their hand. Now, if you're extremely aggressive, and you've shown that throughout the session, and you're playing versus a really good player who's been paying very good close attention to you, then, well, they might hero call you with overpairs. Okay, if they do, touche to them, hats off to them, but don't worry about it. That's typically not going to happen. Now, the third best spot to 3-barrel bluff is when we c-bet the flop with the straight draw, flush draw combination, and either the turn or river, we have relevant blockers to the nuts or second nuts. For example, let's say under the gun opens in a full ring game, and we flat with ace, king, ace 10, king 6, diamonds, and spades from middle position. Now, the reason we did not 3-bet here, as he's under the gun, a huge under the gun range is going to be strong suited kings, suited aces. If we had an ace 10 king 8 in our hand, I would definitely 3-bet that hand, but the 6 is a little bit too gapped. But anyways, the flop comes jack 9 4, 2 spades with 1 club, so we have the second nut flush draw with a gut shot to the nuts. Opponent checks, as he should, mainly be checking on this flop as there are so many poor turns for him if he does have a hand like aces or kings. Having our flush draw and nut gut shot draw, we bet half pot. He doesn't look very confident, and he calls. The turn comes a 8 of hearts. Villain checks, and now it's time to represent queen 10 or even 7-10, because again we have a 10 blocker, and we have outs to the nuts and outs to the second nut flush draw. in case he does raise. So we bet pot here again. He thinks for a while and eventually makes the call. And at this point, it's safe to say, again, guys, he does not have queen 10, as he would have most likely went all in. The river comes a offsuit 5. He checks again, and now, again, it's time to represent the nuts straight. If you're wondering what hands he can possibly have here, possibly hands like ace, king, queen 5 with the nut flush draw with the gut shot that just check called the flop would make a lot of sense. Or a hand like queen 8, 9, jack with 2 pair and a gut shot that just called the turn and didn't know what to do on the river. Or hands like queen, jack, 8, queen, which is 2 pair and a flush draw. And again, guys, most players, especially in full ring games, will just be check folding the river here, as queen 10 is a huge part of our range. We can have hands like queen 8, 9, 10, queen, jack, 10, 9, queen, queen, 10, 9. So let's say villain checks and we pot. And he starts to complain about how many outs he had and how they all missed. He shows his hand and eventually mucks. And we have a smirk on our face knowing we just stole a massive, massive pot with absolute air. Guys, tell me in the comments section if you guys have made a 3-barrel bluff like this and the opponent did the same exact thing. I've seen it happen thousands of times in my career. But guys, to sum it up, 3-barreling is a powerful tool in Pot Limit Omaha. It can print you a ton of money. However, it's essential to understand exactly what you're repping or going to be representing, and make sure you have the best possible blockers here, and also understand what your opponent's possible range is. So before you 3-barrel bluff, make sure you're checking off at least 1 or 2 of these key points to maximize your chances at getting a fold from your opponents. Number 1, again, you have blockers to the straights or strong flushes. Number 2, the opponent most likely does not have the nuts. That is just a given. Number 3, most if not all draws missed. Number 4, villain looks or acts physically weak during the hand. And number 5, we've been playing fairly tight. So we have a very good image to do this. I promise if you guys pay attention to all these key points during your play and look for spots where you can implement these specific strategies, you will get a lot more folds in the long run compared to calls. And if you guys have watched this entire video, then I promise you will find spots to be able to do this. Don't only think about spots where you can do this, where you're in a hand with them, but think about other spots. Look at other pots your villains are in, or 2 villains are in, where you think you could have implemented this if you were one of the opponents. Now, of course, there are times where you should slow down, and the times I like to slow down is when I'm not getting any respect, or you're up against a calling station who does not believe you, or extremely tight passive player who loves to trap every time they have the nuts. That's pretty, self-explanatory. So if you guys like this video, let me know in the comment section what other types of lessons you guys want to learn in PLO, or where you're struggling, and I'll make sure to help you guys out. So until the next video, good luck at the tables. Peace out, you guys.